All right, welcome to part 8 of the video lecture series for Chapter 9, the Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. Up until this point, we've been dealing with the generalities of virtual desktop infrastructure, and then the VMware implementation thereof. Now we're going to start talking about the Microsoft Virtual Desktop Infrastructure. And in and amongst these, I'm going to intersperse the lab demos for these. There are about 4 or 5 of them now. All different components of Lab 9-2 out of the MindTap course. There are some activities in the books which we don't do. Like, for example, Activity 9-17, installing a Win 10 image. We don't do that, we skip straight to sysprepping it, but we'll get there. But before we get to all of that, we need to talk about what the Microsoft Virtual Desktop Infrastructure is. Now, if you've watched the other videos, you've already seen this slide because I jumped ahead to it. So now we're getting back to it in earnest. Terminal services goes back to the Windows NT days. Starting with Windows Server 2008, terminal services became session virtualization because in the mid 2000s, some of the virtualization technology that we now have in a much more mature form started hitting, making its way into the enterprise. Now, if you take session virtualization with virtual desktop infrastructure, you turn all that into remote desktop services. Now, there's another way to use remote desktop services, the remote desktop protocol, by tying into a specific computer. But we're not going to deal with that. Now, there are 5 basic components of the virtual desktop infrastructure. You have your connection broker. You have your web access, you have your virtualization host, you have your gateway, and you have your licensing. Now, depending on how you do this, these might all be the same system, or these parts may all be farmed out to different systems. Now, there's a 6th component, the session host, which will allow you to tie into a specific computer at the same into a specific remote terminal. But you don't have to tie into that. That's not actually part of virtual desktop infrastructure because you're actually connecting using RDS to a physical machine. So when you're installing remote desktop services like this, you can either choose one of these or the other, virtualization or session host. If you choose the one, you can go back and do the other. And it actually kind of, this is sort of a graphic that you can actually see in Server Manager inside the RDS subsection of Server Manager. So you've got your connection broker, which is kind of the hub of the whole system. You got your virtualization host. Now, your virtualization, I know there's a dotted line here going over to session hosts, indicating that it's not necessary. It is not actually tied into VDI at all. So your virtualization hosts, these are the hosts on which the virtual machines that you're presenting to the user through the connection broker, through web access, that's where they actually live. So your web access is essentially the IIS server that presents the web interface to your client. You can have all these things running on the same system, and if you do, you'll have IIS and Hyper-V and your connection broker, all of it at once. It's also providing your gateway and your licensing. And actually, we'll talk in a little bit more detail about that, how some of this stuff works in the next video when we start talking about installation process. You basically select all of these during the installation process. And if you put them all on the same machine, because you have a very small implementation and you just have the one system, that's fine. One thing to note, and I'm going to stress this, I've said it I said it more than once in the lab, in the demo videos as well. You cannot do this on a domain controller. The system or systems that do this, that have these various roles, your connection broker, your web access server, your virtualization host, the gateway licensing, all of it, these must all be member servers in your Active Directory domain. They cannot be domain controllers. So there's that. We'll talk about the process of picking all of these next. And of course, I've got the demo video about how to install this, how to set it all up. And so go watch that as well. Thanks, and we'll be right back.